Hi, everyone. This is Heather Lottinen from the Flourish.Academy. I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Mara Chick. Hey, Mara.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great. Hey, what's the point of this podcast? What are we doing?
Nothing.
No point.
There's no point in this podcast at all. No, of course there's a point because Heather and I wouldn't do something without a point. The point is to read the book so you don't have to. So even if you say you don't have time, which is probably a lie, because if you're like Heather, you own time. Time is yours.
I own
You
it.
should be able to read. But if you can't, we're here for you.
Right.
And we're going to continue our discussion on The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath.
This is a great book. We're on to chapter 5 right now.
And get ready for some serious talk here, people.
Chapter 5 starts on page 97. And listen, Mara's correct. Brace yourselves. Because this was one of my favorite chapters of the book. It's called Trip Over the Truth. Mara and I are both coaches. And we know that the best way to get people to make change is to ask them thought-provoking questions so that they come to their own conclusions.
Uh-oh.
And the authors have a really good story about this. Okay, in 2016, this is from the book, there were about 1 billion people worldwide who lacked access to clean water, and also 1 billion who, lacking toilets, defecated outdoors, often in areas used by multiple people. This practice of open defecation has dire health consequences. It leads to the mass spread of diseases, among them cholera, hookworm, roundworm, etc., causes people to suffer or die. How could you end the practice of open defecation? So he goes on to explain that what people were doing for years was building latrines. They would go into these villages, they would build latrines, and they would say to them, hey, this is not a good idea to defecate anywhere outdoors. Use these latrines that we bought you. And people weren't doing it. And they couldn't figure out why, except that what they were doing when the people left was they were taking components of the latrines and using them in their homes, because oftentimes the latrines were nicer than their homes. And they thought, why would I go in there to use the bathroom when it's nicer than my house? So it wasn't working. So the problem was not facilities. And they formed this this methodology called the Community-Led Total Sanitation, CLTS. And the facilitator arrives in villages, and I'm going to just go over his methodology for getting people to trip over their own truth, because, did you find this fascinating?
Yeah, I guess.
I love
And
this.
a little like, ew.
Ew, yeah. Okay, so in the book, he uses the word, the inappropriate word for defecating.
Heather doesn't want to curse, S-H-I-T, so she'll just replace it with, what word are you going to replace it with?
Probably going to
I said I would curse, because she's like, oh no, I don't want us to get flagged. And I'm like, that word is said in PG movies, but she still doesn't want me to say it.
That's true. I'm probably going to end up saying poop. But, okay, so what he does, this is great, is he goes into the village and he just asks people straight up, where do people poop? And so people will say, he said they'll be embarrassed, but they'll point to him, okay, over here, over here. And so he'll go up to a pile of poop and say, well, whose is this? Did anyone poop here today? And then people put their hands up and it's real embarrassing. And he'll point out, well, why is yours yellow and yours green? And he'll start asking these questions to make them look at it. And he says the stench is overpowering. People are covering their noses with their clothes. The facilitator keeps asking disgusting questions, essentially drawing attention to it. He draws attention to the flies flitting between piles and asks them, are there flies here? Of course there are flies here. He sees a chicken pecking at the poop. Do you eat this chicken? More nods. So all of these questions he says them in a very neutral, like.
And how you listeners feel right now is, imagine how those people felt, because
it's disgusting.
We are like, oh, and they're probably like, oh.
And that's
part of
that's their poop.
Yes.
So, okay, then he asks them to draw a map of the village in the dirt. So they map out the boundaries of the village with important landmarks. And then once it's filled in, he gets a bag of yellow chalk and he asks them to sprinkle on the places where people poop. So on this map, this makeshift map in the ground, sprinkle the chalk. So he says, where there's more poop, use more chalk. So there's nervous laughter. This is super awkward. So they start sprinkling. And then he says, but where do you poop in emergencies? If a rainstorm, or what if you have diarrhea? So now they're like, ooh, and they start sprinkling chalk everywhere. And oftentimes it would circle people's homes, like in emergency cases. So he said, it's hard to miss at this point that the entire village is covered in yellow. Like this chalk in this map, like they're just pooping everywhere. In the book, he says there's turbulent energy in the crowd, anxious, disgusted, angry, embarrassed, and they're not sure what it all means. So then the facilitator asks for a glass of water. And he says, would you feel comfortable drinking this? And they say yes. And he says, okay. He pulls a hair from his head. What's in my hand? A hair. Can you see it? Well, not really. So he walks over to a pile of poop, dips his hair in a pile of poop, and then swirls it around in the water. takes his hair out and says, would you drink it now? And they're like, of course not. They refuse. And he said, why? And they're like, because there's poop in it. So then he stands there looking puzzled and says, how many legs does a fly have? Okay, 6, right. And they're all serrated. Do you think flies pick up more or less poop than my hair? More. Do you ever see flies on your food? Yes. Do you throw out the food when you see that? No. Then what are you eating? He says at this point, the tension is unbearable. This is the igniting moment. The truth is inescapable. They have been eating each other's poop for years.
Yeah.
So at this point, he gets them to trip over their own truth and say, oh, wow, we've been eating our own poop for years and we didn't even notice it. He says there's a 3-part recipe to this. There's clear insight, compressed in time, discovered by the audience itself. So they did that so that they tripped over their own truth. And a good coach, like I mentioned earlier, asks thought-provoking questions.
Okay, but you're a good coach, but you're not doing poop exercises. At least I hope not.
No.
Oh, God.
But
what's happening on your homestead? I'd like to know. Are you testing this out for real?
That's a good point.
Oh my gosh.
That's a good point. He says to trip over the truth is to catch one's brain on something and the struggle. I mean, okay, I love this story. I tell anybody to listen to this story because I think it's hilarious, but I think it's just a great metaphor. How can we, do you ever see a friend struggling with something that's so obvious to you, but they can't see it? But you can't tell them because if you told them, they still wouldn't see it. They have to come to their own conclusion or trip over their own truth. And the key here was the right kinds of questions. I want to get better at that.
Yeah, you do. Okay. So on page 106, what they're doing is saying they're dramatizing the problems. They say ingesting feces. Okay. They dramatize.
Not a good idea.
Yes. Struggling to, they use some different examples here, like struggling to use a software package. Once those problems become vivid in the minds of the audience members, their thoughts immediately turn to solutions, which is what we want as coaches, right? We want people to kind of come up with their own solutions. It's us to ask the questions and then okay, what's the solution to that problem? They go on to say, you can't appreciate the solution until you appreciate the problem. So when we talk about tripping over the truth, we mean the truth about a problem or harm. That's what sparks sudden insight.
Oh, I love this so much. This is worth picking up this book just for chapter 5, tripping over
Heather
the truth.
just read you the poop story, so you could skip over that part.
But when you read it, okay, he purposefully used the other word for impact.
The PG word.
Yeah, for impact. Though even in the community, and I guess the way he did it, if you read it, was just super straightforward and very neutral, just asking questions, not trying to lead an answer. They had to figure it out on their own that they needed latrines or designated areas, that they should not be pooping all over the village.
Okay.
Lest they want to continue eating it.
Okay. Moratorium on the poop talk, okay? Right. No.
Roger.
Okay. On page 108, they go into this exercise that I think is very helpful for you all to figure out kind of... I mean, I'm still in poop mode, okay? Okay, I'm just going to read this here really quick. On the afternoon of the first day of the course Design Institute, something they addressed earlier, Palmer, it's this guy that's running this program, introduces an activity called the Dream Exercise, inspired by an idea in L.D. Fink's book, Creating Significant Learning Experiences. He puts the following question to his audience of 25 to 30 professors, quote, imagine that you have a group of dream students. They are engaged, they are perfectly behaved, and they have perfect memories. Fill in this sentence. 3 to 5 years from now, my students still know blank, or they still are able to blank, or they still find value in blank. Palmer's dream exercise is a brilliantly designed moment that compels professors to trip over their truth. their own truth.
This was really good because what he was saying was professors designing their syllabi, did they feel like they were making a difference or the students saw the value in what they were doing? How many times do you hear a high school student say, I don't know why I have to learn this. I don't see the value in almost every class they take, right? But if the teacher or the professor had a different approach, which is this sentence, one sentence with 3 to 5 years from now, 3 things, my students will know blank, or they are still able to do blank, or they will still find value in blank. I actually wrote in the margin to do this ASAP because I teach. And I need to do this. I haven't done it yet, but I'm planning to because...
Okay, I'll coach you. I'll follow up with you in a week to see if you've done it.
Set a date. Let's make it a goal. But, I mean, isn't that remarkable to think of it that way in terms of you're adding value and they'll see it years from now.
And it's also very simplistic because they're not asking you to write a paragraph on what you want your students to know. It's just very baseline. What is it that you want to reach with your students, you know? So I love that.
I love simple. This so much.
So that was Heather's favorite chapter. I'm going to call that affectionately the poop chapter. We're going to move to chapter 6, which is Stretch for Insight. So from page 117, self-insight rarely comes from staying in our heads. Research suggests that reflecting or ruminating on our thoughts and feelings is an ineffective way to achieve true understanding. Studying our own behavior is more fruitful. Better to take a risk, try something, and distill the answer from experience rather than from navel-gazing. Have you ever heard of that word? Navel?
I've heard it a couple times recently from books like this, essentially looking in at yourself or looking down. Yeah, okay. But I like where he says action leads to insight more than insight leads to action. Yes. Learning who we are and what we want and what we're capable of is a lifelong process.
Let's face it, many of us become adults with homes and jobs and spouses long before we really understood ourselves. Well, ain't that the truth?
Yeah, it's actually, I read a quote by Albert Einstein recently about this, but essentially saying the best thing you can do is figure out who you are and what you want. And it's actually biblical, which is know thyself. Know what makes you tick. But you cannot get that just by sitting around thinking, what makes me tick? That's not how that works.
And he says because there's 2 authors here, self-understanding comes slowly. One of the few ways to accelerate it, to experience more crystallizing moments, is to stretch for insight. Okay? So
action. It takes action to do it. And he gives this example of would I make a fabulous bakery owner? And the question here, and there's a story somewhere in the book about someone who started a bakery because she loved to bake. Well, just because you love to bake does not mean you would make a good entrepreneur. And she actually discovered it was not for her. And she closed her doors, not as a failure, as a success, because she learned that she did not want to have her own business, that she loved to bake. She enjoyed doing it for friends and family. But when it became work and she had to do the accounting and the marketing and everything else, it was too much of a burden. So that's a success, not a failure, because she learned about herself.
Okay, I think one of your favorite quotes, or our favorite quote together, is on page 122. Heather.
Okay, 122, he's talking about mentors. And I mentor a lot of people, and I love this. He says, mentors push and mentees stretch. If you mentor someone, student, an employee, a relative, you might wonder about the best way to give them a productive push. A good starting place is a 2-part formula cited in a paper by the psychologist David Scott Yeager and his 8 colleagues. It essentially is high standards plus assurance. So they did this study was this high school or college students they did this on research papers. The teacher, it looks to me like it's high school. The students had to write a paper, and the teacher, in this experiment, the teacher would write on the papers. On half of the papers, he would write, I'm giving you these comments so that you'll have feedback on your paper. And that was it. On the other half of the papers, he wrote, I'm giving you these comments because I have very high expectations and I know you can reach them. So it was the high standards plus the assurance. And it went on to say that 80% of the wise criticism students revised their papers, and in editing their papers made them twice as many corrections as the other students. So it improved it significantly. It's direction and support. I have high expectations for you, and I know you can meet them. So try this new challenge, and if you fail, I'll help you recover. That's good with parenting as well. To say, listen, I'm okay if you fail, but you have to try. But I expect certain things from you, and I'm pretty sure you're going to be able to do it anyway. So why not push yourself? But you know what, Mara? It's a fine line. Isn't it a fine line between how far I push you in the past or someone new that I have now, far enough to stretch them, but not so far that I break them?
And you can break people if you're trying really hard, but I think it's about knowing who you're working with and being able to say, like, okay, I can only push this person so far. And that's kind of where the max will be, because if you push them beyond that, then they're just going to be like, I quit.
They're done.
I can't handle it anymore. So
you were very good. I was able to push you pretty far and had confidence that it wouldn't break you because you're pretty tough, and I push. But I do have some clients that are sensitive, and I respect that. And but sometimes I need to like dial down the Navy SEAL.
Yeah, even with me, you need to dial down.
Dial it down. And I have but how do you? It's just hard because you want to push people
line to toe there,
right?
Yeah,
it is
because you just want to slap them silly and be like, "Listen to me."
But
you can't. There's a way to communicate with everybody. Go ahead.
If you're always in a life vest, you don't know if you can swim.
I love that quote from this book.
That's from Michael Phelps. He said that because you have to. You don't know what you're capable of unless you try, which means you're going to have to push through that struggle and just see what happens.
And we're all afraid of failing. I think that's what people struggle with is like, I don't want to try because I'm going to fail. Well, how do you know?
You don't
until
know
you try and you don't.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was chapter 6. We're going to move straight into chapter 7. Just a couple things we want to touch on here before we wrap up today's episode. And he moves into talking about moments of pride. And in the introduction on page 139, he says this: How do you make moments of pride? The recipe seems clear. You work hard, you put in the time, and as a result, you get more talented and accomplish more. And those achievements spark pride. Simple as that. There's a lot of truth to that roll up your sleeves advice, but when you start thinking in moments, you notice that the advice misses several important points. First, regardless of how skilled we are, it's usually having our skill noticed by others that sparks the moment of pride. And I know this a lot from my corporate days. Like, I could have taken pride in my work, but I felt so much more prideful when someone else recognized my hard work. Because when it's me, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm doing this and I feel good about myself. But you feel even better when someone recognizes you for what you're doing. And that's exactly what they talk about in chapter 7, recognizing others. So on page 157, just really quick here, researchers have found that if you conduct a gratitude visit, you feel a rush of happiness afterwards. In fact, it's one of the most pronounced spikes that have been found in any positive psychology intervention. Gratitude visits. Would you like a gratitude visit?
Yes, I'm going to need one this afternoon.
Oh, okay.
I mean, you mean going to visit someone or speaking to a client or a family member and just showing them gratitude.
Yes.
Yeah.
Writing letters to people that have touched you. And I always do this when I'm with people. I did this with you yesterday when I saw you. I let people know pretty much every time I see them how thankful I am for them, what they've done for me. And I make sure they know how much they've impacted me because I think it's important for people to know they're recognized, even for the little things that they do, showing up, holding your hand, giving you a hug, like all those little things, that matters to me. So I let people know.
Good for you. You do that. And it shows that you're paying attention, that you are mindful and aware. I have one client that is so good at writing letters. So she writes letters and sends cards to her clients, to me as her instructor. I mean, all the time. She just has a gift for it. And I think, man, I want to do something like that. Everybody has their own thing. So maybe it's not writing letters. Maybe that's not it. Maybe it's, for you, it's just recognizing people face to face and speaking. But you can do something to show that gratitude. Maybe we should have that as one of our challenges.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I know you have a strategy, but
but we could do, and we've done some gratitude stuff in the past, so people should be used to this.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking when we were talking earlier about self-insight and how it's a slow process getting to know kind of yourself. And one of the things we're doing in my self-love club is working on self-discovery for the next 6 months. And it's been really challenging for the women in the club to be like, wait a second. Oh, is that who I really am? Like, because you're not sure until you kind of look back over these things, like your strengths and
You don't
what
know.
are your core values and like all these things that have challenged you, like words that would describe you, like what do people say about you? All these exercises I'm having them go through just so that they can see the whole person that they are. And that is super impactful to look back on it. As our producer said earlier, to me, before we started recording, it's all hindsight. You see in 2020 and some of these moments, you don't see them while they're happening. But when you look back, you're like, wow, that was a defining moment for me. And I love that.
And it gives you clarity.
Yes.
Clarity that you didn't have. What is our strategy?
Your strategy.
Yeah.
So you are going to do the exercise that we had talked about earlier, okay? Fill in this sentence. 3 to 5 years from now, my, whatever it is, students, clients, your children, your family members, anything, they still know what, or they're still able to do this, or they still find value in this. Get it down to the basic level. What do you want people to still remember in 3 to 5 years? Do I want to remember recording this podcast with you today?
Maybe, maybe not. You are hilarious.
Not sure. I'm just kidding.
I know.
You know how I feel about you.
I know.
You are one of the best people I know.
Yeah.
Heather is my soul family.
Oh, thank
Here
you.
I'm practicing my gratitude.
Thank you.
You're my soul family. You lean in when things get hard.
And
that means a lot to me.
Yeah, and I learned it from you.
Oh, gosh.
So.
Don't make me cry. Okay, as we wrap up today's episode, Heather, how's everyone going to support the podcast?
Of course.
Lay it on them.
Yes. Please subscribe. Please leave a comment, review. It would really help if you'd like to watch us on video, because it's sometimes kind of funny, the faces we make. Especially,
What's wrong with my face?
Especially when I was talking about poop for 10 minutes.
Oh,
Mara's face is priceless. And you can check that out at Flourish.Academy.tv. You can
just
see,
what they want to see.
maybe they could freeze frame your face.
And put screenshots of me. Because I make fun of myself. Listen, you can screenshot any inappropriate photo. I mean,
of your making funny faces.
Making funny
Let's be
faces.
clear.
Yeah.
Hey, and if you like the content, why don't you share with your friends? That would be helpful. Tell them it's awesome. You're learning a lot, and we're reading books for you. And speaking of books, if you'd wish to purchase any of the books that we discuss on the podcast, if you could use our Amazon affiliate link, that would help just to offset the cost a little bit.
A couple of cents here and there. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. We'll catch you next time on the Flourish Academy podcast.